Hey everyone, just dropping that usual reminder to hit the like and subscribe buttons and ring the notification bell and turn on all notifications. And don't forget to drop a quick comment saying where you're watching from or what you're up to while you're listening. In 1127, the people of Peterborough in England were shaken by a terrifying spectacle. It was said that a phantasmal hunting party rampaged through the woods repeatedly. These otherworldly huntsmen rode on black horses, and even black goats, accompanied by a pack of jet-black hounds with eyes like saucers. The spectral horde blew horns and shouted in the night, striking fear into all who heard them. This eerie scene is a classic example of the wild hunt, a ghostly chase that has haunted European folklore for millennia. The wild hunt is a widespread folklore motif involving a supernatural hunting party in furious pursuit, usually seen riding across the sky or through remote forests during stormy nights. The hunters are ghostly apparitions, often the souls of the dead or other supernatural beings like phantom warriors and demon dogs. Leading this unruly band is a wild huntsman, a mythic or ghostly figure whose identity varies by region. In Germanic lands, the leader was frequently identified as the god Odin or another pagan deity. Elsewhere, the huntsman might be a cursed legendary hero, a biblical villain such as Herod or Cain, or even the devil himself leading his legions. Regardless of the leader's name, the wild hunt's appearance is invariably fearsome. A clamoring cavalcade rushing by with black horses, spectral riders, and baying hounds. Encountering it was believed to be an exceedingly bad omen. Witnesses feared it heralded a looming war or plague, or at worst, their own imminent death. Many stories warn that anyone who crosses the wild hunt's path risks being swept up into the ride. The unlucky soul might be abducted to the land of the dead or, in Celtic regions, to fairy realms, never to return. Folklorists have traced wild hunt stories across northern, western, and central Europe and amongst Germanic, Celtic, and Slavic peoples. It's generally believed to originate from Germanic myths and legend, diffusing out from them to these other groups, though this isn't known with complete certainty. The concept is also found in areas that were once heavily influenced by these groups, including northern Italy, France, and Spain. The term wild hunt, known in German as wilde Jagd, was coined by the legendary folklorist Jacob Grimm in 1835. He had studied various folk tales of spectral hunters and hypothesized ancient pagan origins for the myth. Modern scholars debate the particulars of those origins, but the legend of the wild host on night rides struck a chord in many cultures. From Scandinavia to Spain, each region told its own version of the wild hunt, adapting the core motif to local characters and beliefs. Despite the varied geographical locations, every version of the wild hunt carries an aura of doom. In medieval times, a community that claimed to witness a spectral hunting party in the sky might fear that disaster was imminent. To see the wild hunt at all was to risk one's life or soul. Many stories tell of the hunters snatching up lone travelers, or anyone foolish enough to get in their way. More often than not, the wild hunt also served as a warning, often coming as a punishment for wrongdoing. Thus, the frightening myth reminded people to live rightly and humbly, lest they join that ghostly troop after death. Some folklorists and skeptics argue that reported wild hunt sightings could stem from natural, atmospheric, or environmental phenomena. One suggestion is that people witnessing powerful winter storms might interpret these as spectral riders, thunderous horses, and hellhounds racing across the skies. Historically, turbulent weather under dark winter skies would have been fertile ground for such misperceptions. Another hypothesis draws on psychological and social cultural factors. According to this view, collective anxiety could lead to shared hallucinations or group-reinforced legends. When combined with oral tradition and expectation, even ordinary sounds could be interpreted as evidence of these ghostly hunts. Still another claim is that this represents a sighting of an aurora borealis, or reflects the distant and ancient cultural memories of sightings of them. Of course, the traditional view that these are actually rare ghostly riders in the sky continues to remain popular as well. You're sailing the desolate, ice-choked waters near Greenland in 1775 when, through the biting fog, a ship appears. She's weathered and weary, completely sheathed in thick spectral white ice, yet her tattered sails still hold the wind, propelling her on an endless journey. As you approach, you realize she's entirely silent, her deck barren. When your boarding party breaks below, they find the crew of 28, not missing, but perfectly preserved, locked in the macabre stillness of their final frozen moment. They've been dead for 13 years, but the ship hasn't stopped sailing. This is the legend of the ghost ship Octavius, a story where parsing truth from fiction is the only way to get at the true history that lies within this frozen floating tomb. And as a quick programming note, for this segment, I'll first present the legend as it's usually told, and then discuss the problems with it after. The genesis of this catastrophe lay in a calculated gamble made years earlier. The Octavius, a three-masted schooner, had departed England in late 1761, intending to complete a standard lucrative merchant voyage to the Orient. The ship successfully reached China the following year, traded its goods, and loaded new exotic cargo for the return to British markets. It was at this crucial point when the captain, who is unnamed in most accounts, made the decision that sealed the fate of everyone aboard. The conventional route back required the arduous, time-consuming voyage around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. However, the captain noted unusually mild weather for the season and succumbed to the temptation of the legendary Northwest Passage. This shortcut, winding through the unforgiving Arctic Ocean above North America, had been the obsession of European explorers for centuries. In 1762, it remained an undiscovered and unproven delusion that had already claimed numerous ships and lives. Sailing through the Arctic ice fields was an astronomical risk, especially for a merchant vessel not specifically designed or equipped for polar exploration. The captain's choice represented a severe instance of hubris, prioritizing the distant dream of fame and a faster commercial return over the assured safety of his crew. The Octavius sailed north, attempting to round the northernmost tip of Alaska, near what is now Point Barrow. This was the last known position while the crew was alive. They entered the narrow, frigid straits, expecting glory, but instead found the crushing grip of the sea ice. The log's final entry confirmed the inevitable. By November 11th, 1762, the Octavius was irreversibly trapped. This marked the beginning of its 13-year drift across the top of the world. The crew and passengers, which included the captain's wife and young son, were lost to the Arctic labyrinth. The details of the discovery found by the Herald's boarding party are what cemented the Octavius as an enduring horror story. Below the silent, icy deck, the sailors found the entire complement of 28 individuals frozen in their cabins. The extreme cold had perfectly suspended the moment of their collective demise, creating an unsettling portrait of life instantaneously stopped. The most chilling scene, if you'll pardon the pun, was in the captain's quarters. According to the common accounts, the captain was found seated at his desk, pen poised in his frozen hand, a ghostly record keeper. Open before him lay the ship's logbook. Beside him were the bodies of his wife, as well as his young son, covered only by blankets. The mother had valiantly sacrificed every warm blanket she had in a vain effort to allow her son some quantum of comfort. Following this completely terrifying encounter, the Herald's crew promptly abandoned the Octavius. Carried by the winds and currents, the ice-laden ship disappeared into the night, never to be sighted again, thereby ensuring its permanent place in maritime lore as an unsolved mystery. But there's some problems with this story, starting with the legal context of the time, since British shipping was already highly regulated by the 18th century. When you consider the captain's fateful decision in the context of 18th century maritime law, his actions can be judged as a form of criminal negligence. A captain aboard a British merchant vessel possessed sweeping authority over his ship, crew, cargo, and route. However, this authority was intrinsically linked to a strict duty to the ship's owners and investors, who entrusted him with valuable commercial assets. The Merchant Seaman Act mandated formalized wage contracts and established the captain's obligation to maintain the agreed-upon route, largely to prevent desertion. After all, the men couldn't desert or even mutiny if they knew what they were getting into when they signed up for the trip. The Octavius captain's decision to pursue the Northwest Passage was a catastrophic deviation from his commercial mandate. He gambled the lives of 28 people and the immense value of the cargo on an unproven, highly dangerous exploratory route. By sailing into the Arctic, the captain created a massive hazard, which resulted in its total loss. But this begs the question as to whether a commercial captain could have ever convinced his crew to undertake such a dangerous mission. After all, sailors who signed up for official expeditions to find the Northwest Passage were compensated in accordance with their risk. These sailors weren't compensated for this, and would have likely refused any such order, given how absolutely insane it was. Simply put, in the 18th century, sailors would mutiny under these conditions, and any captain would have known this. This seems as good a time as any to segue into a discussion of whether this often repeated legend is fact or fiction. The central controversy in the Octavius legend lies in the nature of the key piece of physical evidence which doesn't exist: the logbook. The logbook in the 18th century world of seafaring was the official record of navigation, meteorological observations, and ship management. It was intended to provide documentary evidence for the ship's owners of every action undertaken by the captain and crew. However, the narrative of the Octavius's discovery includes a critical complication. When the Herald's boarding party seized the logbook, they found that the cold had deeply penetrated the paper. As they attempted to read beyond the open page which provided the last quote-unquote confirmed details, they accidentally destroyed the logbook. For researchers studying maritime disasters, logs and journals are vital for reconstructing the final movements and decisions of the crew. The lack of verifiable evidence and the inherent contradictions within the logbook narrative have led to a near-unanimous historical consensus. The Octavius is apocryphal folklore. The absence of primary sources confirming the story is telling, and no British ship undertook such a mission without insurance. The Lloyd's List, which maintained detailed shipping registers, hold no record of a vessel by that name, departing or disappearing in the 1760s. And just as a quick aside here, the Lloyd's List was first published in 1734 and is now on volume 63,000. Notably, the Herald, the ship that supposedly found the Octavius, also suffers the same issue. Despite being a whaling ship which would have required significant insurance and for which a paper trail would exist, the primary sources are again completely silent. Furthermore, the story's origins post-date the supposed 1775 discovery by decades, only appearing in print around 1828. Other stories circulated around the same time, essentially telling the same story, but with less details. Many speculate that the Octavius legend was simply a way to flesh out these stories, which were floating around newspapers. After all, adding a series of compelling details makes the story much more likely to sell than a bland narrative about a ship being found. What makes the Octavius stick with me is how it blends ambition, fear, and atmosphere into what effectively amounts to horror. Even knowing it's almost certainly folklore, the imagery is so strong you can't shake it. A ship drifting for over a decade with its crew frozen mid-task feels like the perfect metaphor for human overconfidence meeting the Arctic's absolute indifference. And maybe that's why the story hits so hard. It feels like something that could have happened. Something that fits our psychology for both glory and shortcuts. It's eerie, tragic, and just grounded enough to feel uncomfortably real until you start scratching the surface. It's also further bolstered by the fact that the SS Bechimo is essentially the real 20th century version of this story, but that's a tale for another time. The year 1883 marked a pivotal, if initially unnoticed, moment in the history of near-Earth astronomy. Our stage is the recently established Zacatecas Astronomical Observatory in Mexico, situated atop La Bufa Hill. José Bonilla, a distinguished Mexican engineer and astronomer, had been elected the observatory's first director in 1882. On August 12, 1883, he was preparing for routine solar observations when his view was abruptly and repeatedly interrupted. Dark, elongated objects were streaking across the brilliant face of the sun, partially blocking its light. He immediately abandoned his planned work to dedicate his energy to documenting this stunning intrusion. This event, treated as a simple misclassification at the time, would likely turn out to be photographic evidence of how close our species came to being wiped out. Over the next 2 days, August 12th and 13th, he documented an astonishing total of 447 distinct dark silhouettes transiting the solar disk. It was an unrelenting, high-speed celestial flyover that suggested a phenomenon of massive yet unknown dimensions. The sheer volume and rapid movement of the objects demanded immediate attention. José Bonilla recognized the event's extraordinary nature and understood that capturing physical evidence was paramount. He performed a diligent, exhaustive observation over approximately 3.5 hours across the 2 days. During this time, he secured the primary evidence that would eventually unlock the likely mystery of what he'd seen. To capture this event, he relied on the challenging photographic methods available at the time. He employed the wet plate collodion process, a sophisticated technique for the 19th century that required a glass plate to be chemically coated, sensitized, exposed, and developed quickly. His diligence was exceptional, managing to capture 447 separate ink photographs during the 48-hour period the event lasted. Because the images were inherently low-quality reproductions due to the early technology, his accompanying written descriptions became essential for context. The scientist consistently described the objects as appearing fuzzy or misty, and critically noted that many of them possessed distinct dark tails. He published his observations without proposing a definitive cause in the prestigious French journal L'Astronomie in January 1886. This meticulous documentation preserved the raw data needed for future analysis. While the descriptions of fuzziness and tails might initially seem like artifacts of poor resolution, these traits would propose a solution to the mystery. The 19th century astronomical establishment struggled immensely to integrate this account into their understanding of the solar system. The response of the establishment wasn't to admit that it was an unknown, but to propose a solution that made no sense whatsoever. The sheer number of objects, combined with their rapid movement, defied easy categorization. The editor of L'Astronomie, when publishing the report, offered a tentative terrestrial solution. He suggested the phenomena might be nothing more than high-altitude flocks of migrating birds or large insects. This simple explanation aligned with the desire to attribute such anomalies to local, earthly causes. This, in essence, allowed the scientific establishment of the time to laugh off these observations, an act that would seem quite short-sighted in the long run. However, physical constraints quickly rendered the biological hypothesis impossible. José Bonilla noted that the objects crossed the face of the sun in a fraction of a second, often less than 1 full second. For any bird or insect to achieve such a speed, they would have had to be moving at velocities far beyond any known biological capability, even accounting for wind conditions. The ultimate flaw in the terrestrial explanation, and the key to the entire mystery, lay in a crucial piece of evidence. The objects were only visible from the Zacatecas observatory. No other observatories, including those in nearby Mexico City, reported the solar transit. Had the objects been distant astronomical bodies, the transit would have been seen across a vast swath of the planet. To jump ahead a bit, their localized visibility is explained by the principle of parallax. A near object appears to shift relative to a distant background depending on the viewer's position. Since the background, the sun, was fixed, the objects had to be extremely close to the observing latitude. This constraint meant the objects were high-velocity bodies skimming the Earth, eliminating both slow-moving terrestrial life and distant celestial bodies. The absence of corroboration, initially used to dismiss the observations, became the strongest piece of physical evidence defining the object's trajectory. For decades following the publication, the Bonilla observation settled into an ambiguous corner of astronomical history. The data was meticulously recorded, yet inexplicable by the technology and theoretical framework of the time. This lack of resolution created a scientific vacuum, and the story of the unidentified objects persisted largely as a curiosity. In the mid-20th century, as popular interest in unidentified flying objects intensified globally, Bonilla's historical photographs gained a new life. The dark, fuzzy objects passing silently across the sun were enthusiastically claimed by some as the first photographic evidence of extraterrestrial visitors. While the narrative lacked scientific rigor, it served an important purpose by keeping the event in the public eye. And just to be clear, the reality of the observation was a lot more horrific than this. The definitive scientific breakthrough arrived in 2011, providing a powerful fact-based interpretation of the 19th century observations. A study provided a working hypothesis that the Mexican astronomer had witnessed the transit of fragments from a comet. This explanation elegantly synthesized all the observed data points in a way no other theory could. The object's appearance as fuzzy silhouettes with dark tails fits perfectly with the description of icy debris as the comet encounters orbital stress. Furthermore, the study quantified the scale of the debris field, finding that the size of the observed objects were consistent with cometary debris. The most consequential finding of the modern analysis involves the potential for catastrophe. The reevaluation revealed that the objects observed weren't just minor space dust. They represented the debris field of a gigantic parent comet. Researchers estimated the original mass of this body, prior to fragmentation, may have been equivalent to over 8 times the mass of Halley's Comet. This realization instantly elevated the observation to a record of one of the most significant planetary near misses in history. By calculating the energy each fragment carried, the researchers could model the impact scenario had the objects collided with Earth. Disturbingly, had it struck Earth, it would have had an impact energy of over 3,000 Tunguska events, which scientists believe would have caused a global extinction event. In the end, what José Bonilla documented wasn't the first photographic evidence of extraterrestrials, nor was it a flock of seagulls or some flying beetles. Instead, it was a terrifying record of our planet's survival by a matter of a couple hundred miles, an event that only one person on the planet noticed at the time. According to the Gospel of John, the seamless robe was a garment worn by Jesus during his crucifixion. The soldiers, recognizing its seamless construction was unnatural in a good way, chose not to divide it but cast lots to determine its owner. Over the millennia, various traditions have claimed possession of this relic, each with its own historical narrative and degree of authenticity. One of the most prominent claims originates from Trier, Germany. Legend suggests that Helena, mother of Emperor Constantine the Great, discovered the seamless robe during her pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the 4th century. She is believed to have sent the robe to Trier, where Constantine had previously resided. The first documented reference to the robe in Trier dates back to 1196, when Archbishop Johann I consecrated an altar containing the relic. Over time, sections of silk were added to the robe, and in the 19th century, it was treated with a rubber solution in an attempt to preserve it. These modifications have rendered the original fabric unsuitable for carbon dating, leaving its authenticity uncertain. The robe is typically kept folded in a reliquary and is rarely displayed. In 1512, during an imperial diet, Emperor Maximilian I requested to see the holy robe, leading to its public exhibition. This event initiated a tradition of pilgrimages, with the relic being displayed at irregular intervals, the most recent being in 2012. The periods between displays can be long, with some lasting as long as 150 years. So if you're really into the idea of seeing this version of the seamless robe, you better book your pilgrimage flight as soon as the next showing's announced. Another popular, though more dubious claim to the seamless robe is found in France. According to this tradition, Empress Irene of Byzantium gifted the robe to Charlemagne around the year 800. Charlemagne then entrusted it to his daughter, Theodora, who was the abbess of a convent in Argenteuil. The earliest known document referencing the robe in Argenteuil dates to 1156, authored by Archbishop Hugh of Rouen, who described it as the garment of the child Jesus. Over time, records began to change, and a legend developed around the relic that it was the seamless robe, an even more sacred relic than mere baby clothing. During the French Revolution, the parish priest cut the robe into pieces to protect it from desecration, with many pieces being lost. Not to be left out, the Eastern Orthodox Church also holds various traditions concerning the whereabouts of the seamless robe. In Georgian lore, a Jewish rabbi named Elias, present at the crucifixion, purchased the robe from the Roman soldier who won the bet for it and then subsequently brought it to Georgia. A portion of this garment is said to have been taken to Russia sometime in the 17th century. While historians and theologians remain skeptical of all claims to the seamless robe, the strongest relative claim appears to be that of the German robe. That said, like with all claims of religious artifacts, especially those directly associated with major league religious figures like Jesus, it may always be best to err on the side of caution.